Well, I have to talk about a tweet, and normally I do not base an entire video off of a tweet, but a tweet is all we have. We have a tweet from Biden, and well, we have a similar tweet from Kamala Harris. Neither of them, just like most politicians, control their own Twitter account. They're not like Donald Trump, who actually tweets for himself. And so this is not a mistake. This is something that was very deliberately put out by their team, and it is that they intend for America to have a carbon pollution-free, electricity industry by 2035. And as far as I'm concerned, this is like the number one. If you had any reason to oppose these two people and want to undermine them every step of the way to make sure that they can do absolutely nothing, they have zero power in this country, this would be the number one reason. Because what they're talking about is, I mean, I don't want to call it the end of civilization, but it is, it would be a pretty substantial decline in the standard of living in the United States. That's what they're talking about by 2035. What they are talking about is turning us all into peasants. Now, they're very mealy-mouthed people. They're not these extreme environmentalists, I don't think. I think that they are, by and large, frauds. So I don't know what they mean by carbon pollution-free, because first of all, carbon's not a pollutant, so carbon pollution is impossible. Carbon is the building block of life, so it doesn't pollute anything. If you take a lump of coal and you throw it in the ocean, it's not going to poison anybody. Everything's made of carbon. But so they also mention in Kamala Harris's tweet that they intend to be carbon neutral by 2050. That's their goal for the U.S. to be carbon neutral, which the whole idea of carbon neutrality is ridiculous. But that is that's a date that's much further down the road, at least from 2035. So I'm not entirely sure if they mean that they want to get rid of all carbon, all fossil fuel, essentially, electricity production methods by 2035, or but either way, they want to move substantially down that road. And if you are moving away from fossil fuels, you're going to have less electricity. That's just a fact. The reason why the production of electricity is dominated, or electrical generation, power generation is dominated by fossil fuel industries, is because that is what is the most plentiful. That's what we can produce the most electricity with. If we could produce as much or more electricity with windmills or solar panels or what have you, then we would be doing that. And the fact that we're not means that generating electricity through means other than burning fossil fuels is, it's less efficient economically. You have to expend more resources to generate the same amount of power. And if that's the case, if you're spending more of your annual income on electricity, and more of your business's costs go to electricity rather than other materials, then that leaves less money overall, and less resources, I should say, to spend on other things. So you're not able to produce as much. The economy will necessarily shrink. The United States, the American people, will become substantially poorer. That's what moving away from carbon and fossil fuels means. And I have to say, I tend to think that, I'm not someone who's a big fan of Alex Jones, but when he's right, he's 100% right. And something that he said, he said it for years, but something that he said recently, if you were listening to him on Tim Pool, said that the reason why the elites want to control carbon and convince people that carbon is a pollutant is because carbon is the building block of life. It's energy. It's everything. And if you can control the carbon molecule, you control all of human civilization. That gives you carte blanche to regulate every aspect of life. Regulating carbon is an excuse for totalitarianism. And that's exactly what's at stake here. If you have someone telling you that you can't produce as much energy, they're telling you that you cannot live your life to the fullest. They're impoverishing you and then telling you it's for your own good. Meanwhile, the rest of the world, except for, say, for maybe Western Europe, but Eastern Europe, Africa, well, maybe not Africa if they're subjugated by the Chinese, but China, India, they're going to be burning as much fossil fuels as they can, and they should, because they want to be rich. They want to provide for their people. They want to live. They want stuff. They want food. We here in America produce very little as it is. That's why we've run massive trade deficits for 40 years now. It's because we import more than we export every year. And the way that we're able to do that is because we have the world reserve currency. We can export all these dollars, and the dollars stay out in the foreign exchange markets in other countries. People take U.S. dollars and they hang on to them, and they'll exchange them to us, for goods. And so our standard of living right now is already much higher, than it should be in terms of what we're producing. And when the bubble in the dollar pops, and we come back down to earth as Americans, and we, as a society, are only able to consume as much as we actually produce here domestically, as much as we're able to exchange, within the rest of the world, we're going to be substantially poorer as it is. But that's without reducing our energy production in any way. That's with, keeping the same level of energy production. If the air comes out of the dollar bubble, and we're no longer, the rest of the world no longer subsidizes our consumption with imports, that just means we're importing less. But that doesn't mean that we're producing less here. If anything, we will need to produce more here to try and recover some of that lost consumption. The only way that the United States and the American people will ever recover the level of purchasing power that we have now is if we, produce goods that the rest of the world wants to buy. But if we are hobbled by not being able to use fossil fuels to generate electricity, to generate power, to drive cars across the country, to drive trucks, if all we have to rely on is our solar panels and windmills and things, there's no way we'll do that. We'll just continue to decline further and further. Now, the good news is that I don't think that that's really possible. I don't think that they have the power to do that. I think that these people are insane. And in fact, I said as much when Ocasio-Cortez proposed the Green New Deal. I said, you don't have to worry about this, because this is insanity. It could never happen. There would be there would be riots in the streets, not riots over abstract concepts like racial justice. They would be food riots, bread riots, because nobody would be able to work. People wouldn't be able to drive anywhere. Their power would be going on and off throughout the day. The entire country, including the government, would collapse, and at that point, the restrictions would be lifted, because, a government that has, no society to govern has no power. You end up being like, what were those guys in Fallout 3? The Enclave. After America's collapsed, you have these guys saying, "Hey, we're Uncle Sam. We're the good old U.S. of A." And it's like nobody cares. America is over at that point. Whether it's a nuclear holocaust or an economic holocaust, an energy holocaust, a carbon holocaust, the U.S. government has no power if they destroy America. But the good news is, even if Biden does ultimately become president on January 20th, that doesn't mean that he's won, because you don't win by doing things like this. You can be defeated at any time as long as people refuse to comply. And that's what I mean when I say that Biden must be defeated. Even if you lose at the ballot box, you can defeat this person or whoever's controlling him, because of course Biden doesn't know what's going on. But you can defeat the elite class by delegitimizing them, by not taking them seriously, by not listening to what they tell you to do. It's why I applaud the president continuing forward with his lawsuits, trying to delegitimize this election and delegitimize a potential President Biden. Because there are some serious things that will actually have to be resisted by people moving forward. And again, this is not, Biden himself personally. Obviously, Harris is regurgitating the same thing. They're both puppets. This goes back to, the Great Reset and the Eurocrats. Biden was already using, their whole dark winter, stupid phrase that they came up with. Build Back Better, I believe, originated with the World Economic Forum. So I mean, he's a total Eurocrat or globalist hack, however you want to look at it. I mean, I distinguish the Eurocrats a bit. But make no mistake, the goal of these people is to have you enslaved. I mean, it goes back to that Great Reset article from a couple of years ago. It's 2030. I own nothing, and I've never been happier. This is something that will not be tolerated in this country, and we need to make sure that you don't give up on fighting those sorts of things, and don't let yourself get distracted from what must be done. Now, I firmly believe that all this Great Reset stuff is nothing but Eurocrat nonsense. I think that it is pie in the sky and could never be accomplished. But that hypothesis of mine only holds or that belief of mine only holds if people actually stand up and refuse to comply. I think that this country cannot handle any sort of economic hardship. Although we've experienced a lot of it here, but I think that economic hardship has raised the temperature in this country quite a bit. But if the elites are going to keep turning the screws on this country, they're going to keep building the pressure higher and higher. And I think that it is, whatever small role I can play in turning up that temperature and helping stoke that fire, not by hurting people, but by alerting people to the pain that's being inflicted upon them, that I must assist in that. While our elites are trying to boil us all as frogs, I think that it's incumbent upon every frog in the pot that can feel what's going on. It's important that they, stand up and try to alert their neighbors, and don't do it, as a madman. Don't say, "Oh my gosh, the globalists are coming to eat your children." You start with the obvious stuff. I mean, because a lot of this is pretty obvious, and then once the first couple dominoes start to fall in your mind, the rest of it all falls into place. All these lockdown restrictions that have been implemented, it's important that people do not become complacent. They need to become increasingly obstinate, because all of this climate change stuff is the next phase of this. As soon as the virus thing is behind us, all these people who are conditioned to do as they're told because their betters said that it's for the greater good, will suddenly be told that they can't drive their car anymore, that they can't have electricity 24 hours a day anymore, that they can't have air conditioning anymore. We will be expected to revert back to a pre-industrial existence. And unfortunately, if you look at this whole lockdown situation as a big test, a substantial portion of the Western world would go along with that willingly. Thankfully, there are some bright spots where that wouldn't happen. But the question is that because of the leaders, or is it because the people wouldn't tolerate it? Because unfortunately, in the places where the leaders have gone along with this and have implemented these draconian, tyrannical restrictions, their populations have mostly complied. And so what this has done is it's validated a lot of these people who want to control you. It's made them feel like they can get away with it, so they're going to keep pushing the envelope. That's what this carbon stuff is. They say, first we took away your job and made you a ward of the state. You now live on welfare. Well, now let's take away a bit of your electricity. Let's take away your car. Let's make it you have to ride our electric, solar-powered Tesla bus. And the more they're able to slowly eat away at your personal freedom, the less power you'll have to resist further acts of aggression and encroachment. And that's why it is crucial that people continue to resist at every stage. Every act of resistance against the state at this point, short of killing people, I don't think that that's a good thing. Don't do that. Don't go out, say, you're starting a revolution and, be a mass shooter and kill a bunch of cops. I don't think that that'll make you look good. If anything, I think that might make more people, that's a good question at this point. I don't know whether that would radicalize more people or if that would make them more compliant. It's hard to say at this point. I don't know how many people would be that sympathetic to the cops in that situation. But either way, I don't think you should do that. I'm not advocating that at all, and if it does happen, I would condemn it. But civil disobedience at this point is crucial. And that should be forms of civil disobedience against the lockdowns, against the politicians who implement the lockdowns, against Biden and Harris, against anyone else who wants to implement these restrictions on carbon and choke out human life. All of it is one struggle against human freedom. And again, Trump's lawsuits are helping in that fight. They're serving to delegitimize Biden. Peter Navarro, who I think that he did good work on his first report. I didn't do a video specifically on that. I know that he consulted Rich Barris, who I think is an excellent authority on a lot of this stuff. He's been doing a lot of good work on discovering illegal votes. Peter Navarro says he's got 384,000, I think it was over 350,000 illegal votes that he discovered in Michigan. You know, the margin of victory there's something like 160,000, I think, that Biden won that state over. All this stuff, even if Biden gets in on January 20th, you want this news to keep coming out. You want to hammer it home with people that, I can't say too much on YouTube, but that there were bad things that happened with this election. Let's put it that way. Because again, delegitimizing the election is a path towards delegitimizing everything that this, next president tries to do in favor of the elite class. It adds to the list of grievances against the king. If you remember in the Declaration of Independence, they listed out all their grievances against King George, and it was a long list that had built up over a long time. There were a lot of disputes. There were a lot of reasons why the American colonists no longer believed that Westminster was acting in their best interests. Or, well, I guess Westminster wasn't who they were addressing. They were addressing the king directly. Parliament wasn't, such a big deal back then. But let's just say England, the English. We need to, build up the same case against Washington. Not just Biden, but Biden. Biden's going to be the head of the beast at that point. There needs to be a very strong case against Biden in particular, and also Kamala Harris. If Kamala Harris is elected in the same election, even if Biden retires or, something bad happens to him medically and he has to, take a leave of absence and Kamala Harris takes over, delegitimizing Biden is just as good as delegitimizing Harris. Nobody voted for Harris for president. She ran for president. Nobody voted for her. So, she'd be, even if the election was totally in the up and up, would be a good, easy one to delegitimize and to try and block. I mean, the Republicans did a decent job blocking Obama, and Obama was a pretty popular president, especially when he first came into office. It was only after Obama started, opening his mouth and race baiting and stoking racial tensions in this country that he became, less universally beloved. So I look forward to seeing good challenges on January 6th to this election, not because I think that they will be successful and that they will be able to decertify even one state. I don't think that will be the case. Congress just, has no interest in acting, but there needs to be people, in the House and the Senate who step forward, who say, we want to get this on the record, that we dispute this, that we do not think that this was, decided correctly. They need to have their debate. That debate needs to be, put into the Senate and the House records. And even if it is a battle that's ultimately lost, it's a very long war against this sort of tyranny. Again, God forbid it becomes a violent war. We do not want that. A violent war is what happens, again, if there is no peaceful separation. That's why the ultimate goal of all this needs to be secession first of, individual states, but different parts of different states need to separate from one another. Basically, everyone who values freedom in this country needs to separate from those who want to align themselves with Europe, with Brussels, and with, frankly, China. Because the party of Davos, the Eurocrats, the World Economic Forum types, the Ray Dalios, they're very interested in what is essentially a modern corporatism or fascism, de jure, not just de facto like we have now. So anyway, the only way that violence comes it will be because people there will be a certain subset of the population who will not go along with all of this. Because it's, again, this is not a conspiracy at this point. This is out in the open, where things are, I didn't talk about this stuff for a long time because it wasn't directly relevant. I try to talk about things that are somewhat relevant to what's going on. But here we are. Biden's in there. He's clearly the candidate of Davos. He's not hiding that. He's repeating all of their talking points. He's, very clearly in bed with China. And if we do not peacefully separate from these people, and and shake off our shackles, what'll end up happening is when the elites try to implement this centrally, if they put out their edicts from Washington, and they tell their agents from the ATF and the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI and whoever else, and they hand down their orders to all the state governors, and they hand down their orders to the sheriffs, and people will not comply. And those people will fight. There will be, again, as I've said, just like with gun control. Gun control would be a part of this. Same thing if you try and get rid of carbon. You will have tens of thousands of Waco sieges or Ruby Ridge situations across this country. That is something that must be avoided at all costs, because that is inevitable. People will just not take this line down. There are massive swaths of this country who have zero exposure to this kind of cosmopolitanism, and they will not give up their way of life without a fight. And so we need to pressure our political leaders at lower levels of government, below the office of the presidency, to resist the executive branch and to resist other people in mid-levels of government who wish to implement this, culminating ultimately in whole states seceding from the Union and declaring their independence from really the Western establishment writ large, from NATO, from the European Union, from China. And yes, I think that China, this was a part of Kissinger's intention with bringing China into the fold. China and the West are not all that different. The West wants to be more like China. China, for the last 30 years, is becoming, more Western. There's going to be, to me, it looks like they're moving together, not apart. So in addition to whole states, that have, decent, reliable governors, removing themselves from the situation at the lower levels, you'll want to have counties and sheriffs, refusing to comply with the central government, maybe breaking away, forming their own independent states. Again, the precedent would be West Virginia during the Civil War. Most of Virginia wanted to secede and join the Confederacy. West Virginia did not. Those counties formed their own new state. They stayed in the Union. Virginia left. Well, I think we'll have the reverse situation happen in, if it comes down to it, in places like New York. You could have parts of upstate New York say, no, we're not going to go along with what Washington and New York City and Philadelphia want. You could have most of Pennsylvania go the same route, saying we're not going to go along with Philly. I think that probably they take Pittsburgh with them. Minnesota, another good example. I think that all across the Midwest you would essentially have all of the counties outside of your major cities refusing to comply with whatever the issue comes down to it. Again, I think ultimately that the big breaking point will come with guns, but if they try and pull this carbon stuff, they say, okay, well, we can't get rid of guns first, we're going to pull the carbon stuff. That'll be the breaking point, too. I mean, you can't just take away people's standards of living and expect them to go along with it for no reason, although people have so far, which I'll grant you that with the lockdown stuff, but I don't think this can go on forever. And the way this was sold is that it was temporary. This is an emergency thing. With the carbon stuff, that's not going away. There's no myth, there's no illusion that will just be temporary. Oh, we need 14 days to slow the emission of carbon. That's absurd on its face. And so it needs to be absolutely clear to people that if you go along with these things, you're giving up your standard of living forever. You won't get it back. So you have to plant, your foot in the sand, draw your line and say so far and no further. And if LA and New York City and Washington and Portland and San Francisco want to go over the cliff, so be it. That must be the message moving forward. I will not comply. And so I have a lot of hope, though. I've said since I started this channel, things have to get much worse before they get any better. But I do firmly believe that things will get better. So with that said, if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.